Okay, so are you ready to dive in? Because today we're really going to get into it with spiritual formation.
I'm ready.
We're talking Dallas Willard.
Yeah.
And Willard, that's not a surface level kind of conversation.
No, it's not.
We're going to uncover some real insights here that I think will stay with you.
Absolutely. And, it's amazing how timely and relevant Willard's work still is today.
It's so true.
Like, he had this incredible foresight to see the struggles that we're facing with spirituality now.
Yeah, he just cuts right through all the noise. And speaking of noise,
Right.
I feel like spiritual formation has become a little bit of a buzzword
For sure.
these days,
Absolutely.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
I'm really curious how Willard would respond to that,
Yeah.
How did he see through that to the real heart of the matter?
Willard was very wary of, I think, what he called the Oprahization of things, where spirituality could be stripped of all of its depth and substance.
Right.
And he really challenged us to go beyond those kind of feel-good trends and to really wrestle with what it means to experience true spiritual formation.
Okay, so I love that distinction because I think that's so important. So how would Willard then define spiritual formation? What is the core thing he wants us to understand?
He goes right back to the source. He goes right back to Scripture.
Okay.
And you have that passage from Luke where Jesus talks about the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good. And Willard is laser focused on that word heart.
Yeah.
But he's not just talking about our emotions when he's talking about the heart.
Okay.
He sees it as the core, the very center of our being. It's our will, our character, our spirit, all of it wrapped up in that word heart. And he says everything we do flows from that wellspring.
That makes me think of that other verse that you pulled about guarding your heart because it's the wellspring of life.
Yeah.
Was that Proverbs?
Proverbs 4.23.
Okay.
And this is where Willard gets so practical. He doesn't want to just leave us with a nice thought.
Right.
He says, pay attention to your heart. Guard it fiercely because it matters.
Yeah.
Your entire life, everything you do flows from what's going on in there.
I mean, that's powerful, but it's also kind of daunting.
It is.
Like, that feels like a huge responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility.
So how do we even begin to change our hearts at that level?
Well, that's where Willard introduces this really helpful concept of what he calls the three wills.
3 wills.
Yeah. So picture this. You're walking down the street and you see a bakery window. And you've got this sudden urge to go in and grab one of those delicious-looking cupcakes.
Oh, yeah.
That's your impulsive will.
Okay.
But then this other voice pops up. Maybe it's your conscience or your sense of willpower.
Right.
And says, maybe not.
Uh-huh.
And then finally, there's this deeper ingrained habit, the one that usually wins out.
Right.
And determines whether you actually walk into that bakery or not.
Yeah.
And that's Willard's 3 wills in action. The impulsive will, the reflective will, and the embodied will.
So the embodied will is kind of like our default setting.
Exactly.
Like it's those reactions we have that we don't even really think about.
Exactly. And for Willard, spiritual formation is about targeting that embodied will, that deep-seated programming that we have. It's about rewiring those automatic responses so that love and joy and peace, all those fruits of the Spirit become our new default.
So it's like when Peter denied Jesus, it
Yeah.
wasn't like a thought-out decision, right?
Right.
Like his fear just took over in that moment.
Yeah, and his embodied will, which had been shaped by fear, dictated his response in that moment before he could even really think about it.
And that's what we don't want, right?
Exactly. None of us want to live our lives as slaves to our gut reactions.
Right.
And Willard is saying that spiritual formation gives us a way out.
Okay. That's pretty amazing, though, when you think about it. Like, I'm not just stuck with these impulses. I've got the power to actually change those default settings.
Exactly.
But how do we do that? What does that rewiring actually look like?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? And Willard says that it's through spiritual disciplines, practices that over time can really shape that embodied will.
See, I knew you were going to say that. Okay, so spiritual disciplines, when I hear that, I think like fasting and, all-night prayer vigils.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, those things definitely have their place.
Okay.
But Willard's view is a lot broader than that.
Okay.
He looks at spiritual disciplines as anything that we do intentionally to create space for God to work in our lives.
So it's not about the specific actions so much as the posture of our hearts when we're doing them.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
He talks about solitude, silent service, things that pull us out of our normal routines and really force us to confront ourselves and our relationship with God on a much deeper level.
Yeah, because it's like we have to be intentional about making space for that transformation to happen.
We do?
It's not just going to magically occur while we're running on the treadmill of life, is it?
Exactly. It reminds me of that analogy of like trying to rearrange the furniture in a house when the foundation's crumbling.
Oh, yeah.
You might feel like you're making progress, but the real issues haven't been addressed.
Right.
And spiritual disciplines help us to shore up that foundation, to deal with those deeper issues that are really driving our thoughts and actions.
And are we talking about sin here?
Yes.
Okay, because Willard doesn't shy away from that word.
No, he doesn't. And he addresses sin not from a place of shame or condemnation,
Right.
but really from a place of hope and possibility.
Okay.
For Willard, spiritual formation is about recognizing that gap between who we are and who God created us to be, and then inviting God's transforming power into those spaces.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about this process of surrendering to God's work in our lives.
Beautifully said. And it's not just about our own personal growth either.
Okay.
Willard connects this idea of transformation to our mission in the world.
Right.
He talks about what he calls the Great Omission from the Great Commission.
The Great Omission. I don't know if I've heard that before.
Yeah, so we're told to go and make disciples, right? Teach them to obey everything Jesus commanded.
Right.
But how often are we really equipping people to actually live out that obedience in their everyday lives?
That's true. We put so much emphasis on believing the right things.
Right.
But what about actually doing them? Oh, this is like that Christian trinket map that you sent over. It's like, go and make disciples, baptize them, ellipsis, and lo, I am with you always.
Yeah.
It's like that ellipsis speaks volumes.
It really does. That's where we kind of skip over the most important part.
Right.
The nitty-gritty of discipleship.
Yeah, the learning and the failing and the getting back up.
Exactly.
And that's where spiritual formation comes in.
Yes.
It's the bridge between believing and doing.
Yes. It equips us to live out our faith in a way that transforms not just our own lives, but the world around us.
Okay, so we've talked about the why of spiritual formation, this heart-deep transformation that it's aiming for.
Right.
But what's the end goal here? What does it look like to live as a spiritually formed person?
Willard uses this striking phrase to describe this. He calls it becoming a different species of human being.
A new species. Okay, now you've got my attention. What does that even mean?
He's drawing on Ephesians 2.15, where Paul talks about how in Christ,
Okay.
God is creating something entirely new,
Okay.
something that transcends our old, broken humanity.
So not like superpowers or anything,
Right.
but this radical internal transformation.
Exactly. Imagine a life where Christ-likeness isn't something you have to strive for, but it's your natural state of being,
Okay.
where love, joy, peace, those fruits of the Spirit flow out of you effortlessly.
Wow.
Because they've become so woven into the fabric of who you are.
So it's not about achieving some superhuman perfection,
Right.
but about becoming more fully human.
Yes, more like the people God created us to be.
I love that Willard talks about this as a lifelong process, right?
He does.
Like a progression of life where we're constantly learning and growing and becoming more and more like Christ.
That's it. And it's not a process that we ever really arrive at.
It's encouraging, to think of it as a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
But I gotta be honest, becoming a new species,
Right.
it still feels a tad overwhelming,
It's a big idea.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do we actually live that out?
Yeah. And I think Willard would be really quick to tell us this isn't about adding one more thing
Right.
to our already overflowing to-do lists.
So it's not about doing more, it's about something deeper.
Exactly. It's about a shift in our orientation,
Okay.
in our posture towards God and towards the world around us. It's about those small, seemingly insignificant acts of obedience that over time really reshaped our hearts and our lives. He actually used this phrase a lot, the importance of just showing up.
Showing up. What do you mean by that?
Showing up to our time with God,
Okay.
even when we don't feel like it.
Right.
Showing up in our relationships, even when it's messy and it's difficult.
Yeah.
Showing up to the needs of the world,
Right.
even when it feels overwhelming.
Right.
And trusting that God will meet us in those moments of surrender.
I love that. It's not about having it all figured out. It's
Yeah.
about just saying yes.
Yeah.
Yes to the invitation. Yes to the process.
Exactly. And we don't have to do it perfectly. In fact, we can't.
Right.
But we can show up
Yeah.
with open hearts, willing to learn, willing to grow,
Mm-hmm.
and, yeah, even willing to stumble along the way.
You know what that makes me think of is those fail videos
Yeah.
that go viral online. Like,
Right.
you know when you see people trying to do something new
Doing
and they
it.
totally just completely mess up?
It's the best.
And you're like both cringing and laughing at the same time.
Yeah, but
But I think it's a good reminder that everyone makes mistakes.
absolutely.
Nobody has this all figured out.
Right.
And what if we could give ourselves that same grace
Yes.
on this journey of spiritual formation? Like, what if we could embrace the messiness,
I love that.
the imperfection,
Yeah.
and just trust that God is working in all of it
Yes.
to make us into the people he's called us to be?
That's beautiful.
So I have a question for you, listener.
Okay.
What's one small step, maybe even just one tiny step that you can take today
I love it.
to align your actions with your beliefs? Maybe it's spending 5 minutes in silence, or reaching out to a friend who's hurting, or maybe even just pausing to really notice the beauty in the world around you.
Yes.
Whatever it is, embrace it
Absolutely.
as an opportunity to show up,
Yes.
to say yes,
Yes.
to God's invitation to become more fully the person he created you to be.
Beautiful.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining your light.